and then now that's kind of worked out for them because Collison seems like he's been a better fit. DeMarcus Cousins seems happier than he was with Thomas, and Thomas hasn't exactly been a rousing success in Phoenix. We'll get more into that later, I'm sure. But just a lot of stuff the Kings have done over the last year or so have been really counterintuitive. And I'd say out of everything, this might be the most so. Obviously, they have someone in mind. I just saw a report that they might talk to George Karl, who actually, speaking of counterintuitive, got fired from his Denver Nuggets job after winning the NBA Coach of the Year award. So the whole situation is confusing right now, and maybe something will come to light that makes it clearer over the next couple of days. What was your reaction to it?
I really don't think he deserved to be fired at all. I mean, he was competing the last 9 or 10 games, the last essentially just under half the season without DeMarcus Cousins. And perhaps he brought out the best in DeMarcus Cousins. I mean, he was playing like an all-star before he went down. The Kings were keeping pace in a very, very difficult Western Conference. I don't think he deserved to be fired at all. But speaking of the Kings, I was reading a column earlier today, and this new Kings owner, or relatively new, just a year and a half old, Vivek Ranadive, he's trying a bunch of very, very inventive stuff. And one of the things that I was reading about is that he's toying with the idea of potentially playing 4-on-5 defense, essentially committing 4 guys to guard, then having one guy sort of just sprint back whenever a shot goes up so he can essentially cherry pick baskets. Do you think that this is at all a realistic strategy to employ?
I don't really. No. I guess I don't think so. I think it's certainly interesting, and I was watching a Lakers game the other day, and just with the fact that they're not playing any defense, anyways, I kind of advise that they should go for it. But I think NBA teams are too athletic. It would work to a degree, but teams would adjust, maybe keep a guard kind of near backcourt, and they get back so quickly that it might work. I would with someone like Kevin Love, who's just one of the all-time great outlet passers, maybe it'd be feasible. I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of turning around on this. It seems you would think NBA
with the right personnel, maybe.
But there would certainly be long rebounds where it would result in easy baskets. There's no way you can defend 4-on-5 long term in the NBA, and it would certainly result in teams scoring absurd amounts of points on them. And I think they'd get probably 10 easy layups a game. I don't think that would be enough to make up for the disadvantage. But as a pure spectator, I wouldn't advise it if I was a coach. As a pure spectator, I'd love to see them try it one game.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess at least the guy's trying some stuff, which I can always appreciate, but maybe this one is a little bit too out there. I mean, I don't think that it's going to work well, but like you said, just as a spectator, I would tune into every Kings game to see them do this. All right, so what else around the NBA has caught your eye?
I guess we'll go with the Phoenix Suns for a little.
Oh, Phoenix Suns. That's the thing I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah,
hometown team.
That's the team that I definitely the only team I have anything resembling inside knowledge on. I wouldn't even say I have all that much. But yeah, it's been certainly an interesting season for the Suns, and I'm really kind of interested in their long-term strategy. Going into the year, you kind of expected them to build on the previous season. They had those 3 first-round draft picks. They brought in T.J. Warren and Tyler Ennis. Bogdanovich is still playing overseas. But kind of expectations were at definitely a new high last year. Last season they were playing, and no one really expected them to be a very good team. I know Bill Simmons guaranteed they'd win under 20 games, and then they came in, they lit the West on fire, finished with 47 or 48 wins.
And probably the most entertaining team to watch in the league. I'd
say they were certainly in the top 5 or 6. And they consistently gave they beat the teams they should, and they consistently gave top-notch teams like Oklahoma City, Miami, Golden State, whoever you want to talk about, good games, and sometimes even beat them last year. So it was just an all-around fun season. And then, of course, they were kind of I guess an example of the journey being more fun than the destination, because now you have this team that has really high expectations and just kind of hasn't fully lived up to it. They lost to 5 teams under 500. I think all 5 of those games were actually at home, and some of them have been really painful. They lost to the Orlando Magic in a super close game. Then they followed that up by 2 or 3 games later. They just lost to the Detroit Pistons when the Pistons were in the midst of a 13-game losing streak. And it's just inexcusable given the talent on this roster that stuff would consistently happen. You have a really solid group of perimeter defenders, and then 2 guys in Goran Dragic and Eric Bledsoe, who should theoretically be the second best backcourt in basketball, at least in my estimation. And I think Isaiah Thomas has been He's been it's really really an interesting league-wide NBA conversation, just not in terms of the Suns, about acquiring a third star at a position where you already have two of them. And the Suns signed him to a super fair contract, and Thomas, at least statistically, has played really well. I believe before he got hurt, at least, he was the leading bench scorer in the NBA. He missed before returning against the against the Pistons. He had missed 7 games in a row. And it just wasn't working out in terms of kind of all three guards getting into a rhythm at the same time. You'd see one, maybe two playing well at once, but it'd never be all three going at the same time. And I think it was really difficult for someone like Goran Dragic, who with Bledsoe being hurt for half the season, he kind of lost control of the ball. And that's what I think really empowered him and made him so good last year, because you'd seen earlier in his career, he had stretches where he was a really solid player, but never a dominant one. And he went from that to being one of the top 6 or 7 point guards in basketball. He was actually third team All-NBA last season. And this year, until Thomas got hurt, he really wasn't a consistent player. And then Thomas got injured, and he kind of started producing like he did last year. So it's an interesting conversation about whether this could function long-term, or as some of my friends and fellow Suns beat writers and radio reporters kind of have talked about, maybe trading Thomas for a big man, which they desperately need, is the right way to go.
Well, it sounds like the Suns are still trying to sort of put themselves together this year. I think it's a real bummer that they missed the playoffs last year, because I feel like they would have given the San Antonio Spurs fits. I mean, I think that, obviously the Spurs were the best team last season. They clearly demonstrated that in the playoffs. But I can't help but think about what would have happened if the Spurs' older backcourt had to go run up and down the court with Eric Bledsoe and Goran Dragic. I think that would have been a nightmare matchup for them.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. I think Bledsoe in particular would have been just a menace, and someone they didn't really have an answer to unless they wanted to throw Kawhi Leonard on him. Oklahoma City was also last year. I know a lot of people talked about that. The Suns came in and beat them twice. Gerald Green in particular, I think he averaged over 25 points a game in those 3 matchups with Oklahoma City. He played really well. Speaking of Oklahoma City, I might be writing a column on this soon. If not, I just wrote a short little thing today. We Valley the Suns released a 5-on-5. And just kind of talking about how the Suns blew an opportunity with that Oklahoma City injury. That was kind of every team's in the West, kind of their key to getting into the playoffs was getting off to a really strong start, particularly when the Suns, they had such an advantageous schedule. And then Oklahoma City, Durant came back a little bit sooner than expected. Westbrook didn't have any delay in coming back, and the Thunder weren't quite as horrible as they could have been without those 2 players. And as a result, after blowing out the Suns last night, they're just, I think, either half a game or 1 game out on the Suns' record on the year. And that's so disappointing that Phoenix blew all those super winnable games, and a lot of them was close. And I think the issue is that the Suns have kind of played down to competition all season. Even when they lost to the Clippers in overtime on that painful Blake Griffin 3-pointer, it was that was the best I've seen them play all year. They played really elite level basketball, and they played like a team that could have beaten anyone. And they were actually Golden State's last loss before the streak, and they beat the Spurs earlier in the season. They've shown they could potentially be, when they're at their best, one of the better teams in the West. But it just seems like, for whatever reason, there's a combination of playing down to competition and having either the offense or the defense, but never both going at the same time, that's kind of holding them back. And as both a writer and admittedly a fan of the team, it's been disappointing and almost painful to watch.
Well, there are 4 Western Conference teams that I dearly wish were in the East, because they deserve to make the playoffs probably more than the bottom 2 or 3 in the East do. I mean, I don't want to see Brooklyn in the playoffs. I really don't. I'd much rather see Phoenix or Anthony Davis in the Pelicans, or DeMarcus Cousins trying to take on a 1 seed by himself. I'd much rather see that than, Kevin Garnett, for instance. I've been a big advocate for conference realignment for a while. I think even before it became a hot topic over the years, I know that's something that was all the way back in middle school. I was wondering why that was, because at least for my lifetime, the West has been the dominant league, even if it hasn't. And obviously they don't win the title every year, but just throughout the season, you see 7-8 teams in the West that are just as good as what the top of the Eastern Conference has to offer. I would say right now, if
if the Suns were hypothetically allowed to be the 8th seed in the East, even though their record would make them the record would actually make them the 7th seed, so they're not much better than that. But if they were hypothetically the 8th seed in the East, I would see a lot of gamblers putting money on the Suns against the Raptors, and I don't think the Raptors would be a huge favorite despite their 18-6 record. And I think as the Suns, a team that's probably going to end up being left out of the playoffs, I think that kind of makes it just abundantly clear how huge of a disparity there is between these conferences. I'll tell you one thing. I think the Mavericks, who are currently the 7th seed in the East, are a better team than the Raptors. And that just
the 7th seed in the West.
Yeah, I'm sorry. 7th seed in the West. And that just kind of gives you an idea of what I think about where both these conferences are at. And it's certainly an interesting discussion to have. And there's certainly a case to be made that you'd lose long-term rivalries and some of the coastal stuff that makes the NBA fun. And there'd be kind of practical issues with travel. But I certainly believe that that's kind of the future of the NBA. Adam Silver is going to see that, and maybe at some point down the road, I don't think it happens anytime soon, that some move will be made to just have the top 16 teams make the playoffs. And frankly, I think that's the only way that's fair, because as I've said on this podcast before, you're kind of doubling down on the fact that the conference is stronger because teams are inevitably going to have worse records, playing more of their games against better competition, and then you're punishing them further because you're comparing harder earned records against the better records of the conference. So it just seems like a blatantly unfair thing to be, particularly when there's financial incentive and just kind of fan happiness incentive to teams making the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, travel might have been a very valid reason not to do this 30 or 40 years ago, but travel's not necessarily a problem anymore, especially not for a financial giant like the NBA. I mean, you can figure it out at this point, but you mentioned the Suns' ugly play, and, for as bad as they've been playing at times and as inconsistent as they are still 500, which is more than I can say for your former favorite team. I don't know what your feelings are about the New York Knicks at this point, but have you dumped them yet?
No, I'm loyal. Unlike us, I have all my friends and I have had this. We have a show called The Bench Mob that's actually also appears in podcast form on Valley of the Suns. And we've kind of gone back and forth, all kind of having loyalties as Lakers fans, Knicks fans, and Celtics fans. And it's certainly an interesting conversation, and it's honestly it's difficult to be a Knicks fan because for all the small little things that are going wrong for the Suns this year, they're still one of the best run teams in the NBA. I've talked to Ryan McDonough. I think he's one of the smartest guys in basketball and one of the best GMs in the entire league. And then the Knicks, for the entirety of my childhood, and I'd say through now, have been the complete opposite of that. And even now, when they presumably have a functional staff and a guy in Phil Jackson who obviously knows the game better than just about anyone else who ever lived running the team, they have just as many losses as the Philadelphia 76ers, who are basically boasting a college roster and intentionally trying to tank games, at least from a management perspective. And the Knicks, who have legitimate NBA talent, are just about as bad as they are. So that's actively depressing me. That being said, I haven't, as from a fan perspective, I haven't ditched them.
Well, actually, we'll get back to the Knicks in a second, but since you brought up the 76ers, are the 76ers intentionally trying to tank this season? Is that the most despicable thing that's ever happened in sports, or just in the top 5?
I wouldn't even put it in the top 5. I think the NBA incentivizes tanking with their current system. I'm not saying that's the wrong system. I'm not even necessarily.
No, I get that it's the smart thing to do, but you're ripping off the people who pay for season tickets.
I guess I think, let's put it like this. I think there should be some financial incentive for fans. I think if the 76ers are going to do this, they should be certain fans who maybe book their tickets before if they book their tickets right before the season, they're doing it to themselves. But for any long-term season ticket holders, they should be given a myriad of benefits to make up for this intentional losing. It's despicable in that sense. That being said, the players still obviously play hard. From a management perspective, it's certainly questionable, but the NBA does incentivize it, and they're going to have a significantly better product long-term for it instead of just being mediocre for years. So they are rewarding fans long-term. I think they should do something to pay back the fans that are sitting through this, I'm just going to say, crap that they're putting out this season. But I think long-term it's going to make them a really, really strong franchise, and that's something these fans are going to benefit from. So I think if you have a long-term perspective, and I'm sure the smarter 76ers fans are fully aware of that, I wouldn't say it's certainly not amongst the worst things that have ever happened in sports. It's not great, but it's definitely not on the worst.
I mean, obviously I was being at least a little bit hyperbolic. I believe that's how you pronounce that. A little bit overblown when I said it's the most despicable thing that happened. I mean, it's obviously not up there with intentionally trying to injure someone or throwing a game or cheating or